Have you ever ridden on a Greyhound bus? Did you know that the original slogan was the Greyhounds of the highway? Now, this was partially because they could get from one location to the next one a lot faster than the other way back in the day. Did you know that the Greyhound dog is the second fastest land animal, and it's second only to the cheetah? And yes, truthfully, they're faster than horses. And because of that amazing speed, Greyhound dog racing was established back in the early 1900s. Now, in today's episode, Christine Ann Dorchak of Grey2kUSA, she joins me. We talked all Greyhounds in this episode, the history of the sport and the abuse that these Greyhounds have endured from the initial real positive idea to the gradual dark side, and how and why Grey2kUSA became the biggest Greyhound advocates and have established themselves to be the protectors of these magnificent animals worldwide, and how a $3.5 billion industry is dying because of their efforts they have made to protect these speedy guys and the abuse they have endured. Christine is on a mission to eliminate all forms of dog racing, and I can't wait for you to hear her story and the accomplishments they've made and what the future really holds. So, for all you animal lovers out there, this is a really, really informative episode. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at PrepVet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today has a really good one. We kind of got our wires crossed back and forth in there, but I'm really excited to have her. Our guest name is Christine Ann Dorchak, and she's with Grey2k. I know it's USA worldwide and all that, but it's about Greyhounds and Greyhound racing, and I feel really privileged to have you here, Christine, and I really want to get into this because I think it's a message everybody needs to hear.
Thank you so much, Mark. It is an honor to be with you today.
Well, it's my honor, actually, because when we get done, you're going to say it wasn't much of an honor, I promise you. But anyways, what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, let's get into your background of, how, what got you to where you are today, and then we'll get into all the other stuff.
Fantastic.
So give me, how you got started before you got involved with the Greyhounds. What's your background? And then we've talked beforehand, so I know some of your passions, but let's kind of, so everybody else listening knows a little bit about you.
Well, I'm nothing special. I'm just a person who found out about a problem and tried to figure out how to solve it. I was born in New Jersey, where there isn't even any dog racing at all. Didn't know much about it, but I had a rather rude awakening to the plight of Greyhounds and what happened to me. And I don't recommend it for everyone, but my personal calling to take on Greyhound gambling was prompted by a near fatal accident in 1992. I was struck by a speeding Boston trolley while walking my dog, Kelsey.
Wow.
She was a 1-year-old Black Russian Terrier. I had adopted her on her last day at a kill shelter 1 year before. And just as I had saved her life on that day, she saved my life and pulled us from the direct path of the oncoming train. And when I awoke from my coma, I realized that my dog had saved my life and that I had a debt to pay. I had to do something to help dogs. I didn't know what it was. And like I said, I didn't know much about Greyhound racing at all. I didn't even know that there were 2 dog tracks in my state of Massachusetts. But then I found out several years later that there were 2,000 dogs who were living on death row just a few miles from my apartment. They were at the Wonderland and Raynham Park dog tracks, and they were being kept in small, stacked cages. And when they were taken out to race, they faced the risk of death and injury at every turn. Thousands of dogs were being injured. Many died while racing. Others were simply destroyed when they were no longer in the money. And I said to myself, why hasn't somebody done anything to help these dogs? And I said, well, maybe I can try. So that's what led to the formation of Grey2k, which has now become Grey2kUSA worldwide. Our mission is to end dog racing, not just in Massachusetts, which we have succeeded in doing, not just nationwide, which we're close to doing, but worldwide. Because the problem of greyhound racing started here in the United States. It's an American invention. So wherever it exists, it's because we invented it and because this industry took hold in Australia and Vietnam and in other countries where it exists now, causing the death and suffering of thousands and thousands of innocent dogs every year.
So let's get into a little bit of background. I know you're an attorney as well. I wanted to bring that up as well, but let's get into the history of greyhounds because they came from England. And I read, and do you know the story about how they got it? They started in South Dakota. I don't know if it's a legend or not. In South Dakota with the Native Americans.
Well, I don't know about the idea that they came from England, but I can tell you about greyhounds.
Okay.
Greyhounds are some of the most ancient dogs known to man. They were the companions of ancient royalty. You will find them in mythology. For instance, if you go to a museum and you look at the tombs of Egyptians, for instance, you'll see beautiful paintings of gods with greyhounds that were guarding those tombs. And it's a long and illustrious history dating back, for centuries. And these beautiful dogs were so protected that in Old England, it was a capital crime to kill a greyhound. So these dogs were beloved for their beauty and their speed. People would watch them course in fields, and their life was quite different until up until 1919, when an American in California realized that money could be made, and these greyhounds were fast, and this speed could be exploited. And he set down the first racetrack in the United States and in the world in Emeryville, California, in 1919. Now, there had been greyhounds who were certainly in this country. They're known to have actually come over with Columbus, for instance. But no one had figured out how to exploit them in this way until 1919.
So, and that was at O.P. Smith, right?
That's right. And he, unfortunately, he's the father of greyhound racing. And at first, he didn't allow gambling, but then
Yeah.
he was convinced that it was necessary to bring in the crowds. So mobsters joined with dog breeders, and together they launched a business that was based on the exploitation of greyhounds, and that was pari-mutuel wagering. So there was illegal racing in various places all across the country, including Chicago. And these were tracks that were run by the likes of Al Capone and Meyer Lansky. They were all illegal. And one by one, they would be shut down and then they'd open again. They were called flapper tracks for that reason. And it wasn't until 1931 that these folks finally convinced some lawmakers that this should be a legal activity, that money was needed for state coffers, and they made a deal. Allow us to legalize dog racing and have legal tracks, and we'll give you a cut of the proceeds. That's what's called the parimutuel tax. So that's how Greyhound racing started. It was thought up in 1919 in California, never legalized, but then went from state to state looking for a legal home, which became Florida in 1931. And when I learned about all this, I was stunned that we were actually exploiting man's best friend for money. And when I looked at the numbers, I realized this isn't even working out for various states.
Right.
For instance, when we began working, the state of Florida was losing millions and millions of dollars on dog racing. So this is decades later. At its height, there were 70 operational tracks in the United States and $3.5 billion bet a year. By the time that we formed Grey2kUSA in 2001, the decline had started, but this is a resilient industry. And we brought a ballot question in 2000 as volunteers in Massachusetts. And the start of Grey2k was rather inauspicious because we lost. We lost 51-49 on the ballot that year. And afterward, a number of us, myself and Carrie Teal principally, stood up afterward and said, wait a minute, we lost, but we almost won. We should not only keep fighting in Massachusetts, we should expand and work nationwide to help these dogs. And bit by bit, we began to have victories, and we began ending dog racing in many places. We went back to the ballot in Massachusetts and won. We ended dog racing in all the New England states. We went out to Arizona. We went out to Colorado. We went wherever there was dog racing, and we passed legislation to ban dog racing. And the key to this was knowing the industry better than it knew itself. And also, we knew that this was a legal fight, and we couldn't afford a lawyer. We work out of a one-room office just outside of Boston. We are a humble little enterprise here. So we'd also been sued for $10 million by one of the track owners at one point. So we were definitely in need of a lawyer. But as I said, we couldn't afford one. So I decided to become a lawyer.
So that's how you became a lawyer. That's fun.
Yeah, out of necessity, Mark. Somebody had to fight for the dogs, somebody who had legal knowledge and would fight for the dogs and not against them. I would go to hearings and there'd be a phalanx of, track attorneys, but we were right. And we had that on our side. And I went to law school for 4 years at night while working by day at Grey2k in the early days. And that knowledge that I acquired, combined with the chess-like political strategy that my partner has, it combined so that we could go state by state and pass legislation to outlaw dog racing. We believe that the key to change is in the law. And it's great to hand out information and, try to affect the public mindset. And certainly that's part of a ballot initiative campaign when we go to the ballot. But when we're working with lawmakers, we need to make our case. And what I realized early on was that we needed evidence to make our case. So the first thing I did was I wrote a bill to force dog tracks to report on Greyhound injuries and deaths for the first time to the public. This doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was a game changer because now, once the public knew how many greyhounds were breaking their legs and dying, they knew that something had to change. And it was no longer a he said, she said campaign, but we could allow the greyhounds to speak for themselves. So those records became the bulwark of our campaigns state by state. And I would also add that this has not been an easy win. We've lost many, many times.
Well, there's big money behind it.
Exactly. The key is perseverance. It's something the industry, I think, really finds annoying about us. Even when we lose, we get up the next day and we start again. We never give up. And that's really key. And that's what I hope our story will inspire others to realize, that change is not easy, but it's definitely possible. And it's inevitable if you keep working.
So let's Let's get in a little bit about dog racing so people that don't know much about it other than they've heard about it, how it works and what it does. Because getting back to that OP, he invented that lure. And so, for you guys listening, one of the things that greyhounds were known for, they're really fast, obviously. But so what they would do, they would chase this lure that looks kind of like a rabbit, I guess. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Greyhound racing is, happens when 8 greyhounds, for instance, let's say, are lined up and they're put in boxes, and they've been trained to chase a lure around an oval track, and people bet on them. That's it. That's the whole concept. And, back in the day, it was one of the few ways that people could gamble. And thankfully, it's a very, being an old fashioned form of gambling and not very fast paced, it has certainly faced a lot of competition from other newer forms of gambling, something which has benefited our campaigns for sure.
Yeah.
So it's not just the education about the cruelty, it's also the competition. The way that these dogs live is really how the problem starts. There's an underbelly of cruelty. Greyhounds are born on private farms, and only the fastest dogs get off the farm. And you might say, only the fastest? All greyhounds are fast. Yes, but some will still, they say, the farmers, they will decide who are the fastest ones.
It's the same with horses.
And the ones that they think are slow or won't be profitable disappear.
Right.
So you never see greyhound puppies, do you? The ones that are lucky, quote unquote, are sent on for more training. And this training involves the use of live lures, which live lure training is the use of small animals to enhance the chase instinct in greyhounds. And the greyhounds are allowed to chase, for instance, rabbits and in the field. And once they get them, they chew them up and kill them.
Yeah, I read something it was rabbits, baby pigs. It just sounds horrible.
Yes, in Australia, baby pigs are frequently used as our possums. Here, we've most seen jackrabbits. We did an investigation 3 or 4 years ago, and every state we went to, we found live lure training, and it was going on with full knowledge of law enforcement. In fact, one of the people we found live lure training was a deputy sheriff himself. That was on Arkansas, if memory serves. So the live lure training happens. The dogs then go on to be used for racing. And when they are, being used in this fashion, they are stored in warehouse-style kennels and stacked cages, with the girls on top, the boys on bottom, and they're let out of these cages a few times a day just to relieve themselves in what is kind of a litter box for greyhounds in the back of the kennel. It's not much; it's a little space, and they spend 20 to 23 hours a day in those cages.
I saw that.
They race several times a month. A race is 30 seconds long, and then they get put back in the cage if they survive. What we have seen, for instance, over the past several years, just in West Virginia, there have been 12,000 injuries to greyhounds, and a broken leg is a death sentence because there's always a cost-benefit analysis in place. A broken-legged dog is a worthless dog, and it costs about $1,000 to fix a broken leg. So this industry isn't going to invest that money. In the best case scenario, the broken-legged dog will be pawned off on a rescue group, and then the rescue group has to absorb the cost. So this is an industry that creates a problem that it then does not help solve. And I would also add, as an animal advocate, I'm very concerned about the fact that here's an industry that's purposefully overbreeding dogs, then adding them, if they survive, to the number of dogs who need homes. We have so many homeless animals in this country, thousands killed each year for lack of space at shelters. And yet, here's an industry that's purposely adding to the problem and just walks away. So from the beginning, on the farms, to the time that they're racing, and when they're in those kennels, they are fed a diet based on raw 4D meat, which is diseased meat. And that's why these dogs often become quite sick. And when a greyhound is fortunate enough to get out of racing it and reach the rescue group and go into a home eventually, oftentimes their teeth are a mess if they still have any. My dog Brooklyn, for instance, whom we rescued from a Chinese dog track that we closed, he had to have almost all of his teeth removed because he had spent years chewing on the bars of his cage.
Oh, that's terrible. One thing I read, of course, when you read on the internet all the different things and you hear from the trainer side, of course, they say no, it's not nearly as bad. And I one of the statements that somebody said really resonated with me. He said, "Well, they're athletes, just the way a professional athlete gets injured. That's just the nature of the beast. But the difference is," I said, "What a stupid statement. The difference is." A dog doesn't have a choice. A human does.
That's right. And the human is taking the risk
Right.
knowingly in the normal situation. And of course, the greyhound has no choice. And these are just beautiful, gentle dogs. And as I say, they come from nobility, so revered in history. They're the only dogs in the Bible. Of course, we know them from literature as well. Homer has a greyhound who waits for his return. These dogs were so special and so beautiful. Our goal at Grey2k is not to restore them to nobility, just to make them dogs again,
Right.
be treated just like any other dog that is loved and cared for and not exploited for the profit he can make.
Well, when you look at the history, what I read is that, again, you were saying, I think 1919 or whatever when the first track was, but prohibition was a big time for it. And they catered to the blue collar worker initially because that was something that people could do, especially when they put lights on the tracks. And then in I guess the 50s, a lot of celebrities were involved with it because it was a thing. And then I guess up until the 80s or 90s when they really started making big money on it, that's when and then that was kind of the beginning of the end, right? Is what happened when people started realizing, like you guys, and getting the word out of all the different things. A lot of the things you didn't talk about though that when I read was the drugs that were used. They found dogs with cocaine, steroids, and all the other things. Steroids obviously are bad there, but there's a variety of it. Oh, the way they transport them and all kinds of different things, right?
That's right. When we first started working in Florida, we found that greyhounds were testing cocaine positive all across the state. At that time, there were 15 tracks in Florida, and we kept finding cocaine positive, cocaine positive. So I wrote to the Attorney General. I wrote to every state attorney for the relevant district. They all said, sorry, we have no authority to do anything. This is a racing issue. And it's up to the Department of Parimutuel Wagering to attend to this. And I said, wait a minute, but these are illegal drugs. So this is an industry that has had Teflon on for years. And the way that they transport the dogs and the small, hauler trucks, the lack of medical care, no greyhounds aren't even spayed and neutered. That's another thing. When someone, says, "Oh, the greyhounds, they in the industry, the trainers, as you've called them, I don't call them trainers. You don't have to train a greyhound. A greyhound is the second fastest mammal at short distances on Earth. They can beat a horse at a short distance. A cheetah is the fastest. So you don't really need to train a greyhound. So that's little fancy name that they like to use, but I just call them industry participants. Industry participants will say, oh, we treat them like kings and queens. And I don't think keeping a dog in a cage for 20 to 23 hours a day is treating them like a king and queen. And they're so used to broken legs because that's the most common injury. I've been in debates where the kennel operator has said to me, broken legs, no big deal. And yeah, it's a big deal if you're the greyhound, especially if you're killed because now you're worthless to that kennel operator. It's such a cruel industry, and these dogs are constantly at risk of dying on any given day, and it's just not fair to these dogs. Thankfully, there's been a great evolution. As you say, the height of Greyhound gambling was in 1992 with $3.5 billion bet, 70 tracks. And we've been working state by state. And now there are just 2 tracks left in one state, and that's the state of West Virginia. And that brings me to another point. Greyhound racing is something that is subsidized by taxpayer dollars. Every state where dog racing continued was a state where taxpayer dollars were being used to and put in the pockets of greyhound breeders. In Connecticut, millions of dollars were going into their pockets. And even in New Hampshire, which is one of the most conservative states, $500,000 was being used just to, cover the costs of operation for dog breeders. Also, in West Virginia right now, $17 million a year is being used to subsidize racing dogs around tracks. And the money keeps going lower and lower. And if the free market were allowed to prevail, dog racing would have ended there too. But unfortunately, as long as the breeders have the stimulation of $17 million a year, they don't have to worry about whether they're actually making money. So this is a gambling issue. So what we have found along the way is that we have been able to find interest in ending greyhound racing from people on all sides of the aisle, left, right, and middle. And sometimes we've had the most unusual odd couples come forward and work together. They would not agree on anything else in this world, but they agree that dogs are family friends, not racing machines, and that dog racing should end. So one of the things I like to say to folks is, when you go into a campaign, don't decide ahead of time who's going to be on your side. In our case, we believe that no matter what your position in life, you've got a reason to dislike greyhound racing, whether it's the tax subsidies, the cruelty to dogs, whatever it is, there's a reason for you to join this fight to end dog racing. And for that reason, we actually have a federal bill now that is has a bipartisan support right now. It's up in Congress. It's the U.S. Greyhound Protection Act. And if anyone would like to help, you can go right on our homepage at Grey2kUSA.org, and with a flick of the button, you can contact your lawmaker and ask him or her to co-sponsor if she hasn't already.
One of the things you mentioned just a little bit ago, and I was reading that, is how fast greyhounds are. They've been recorded up to 45 miles an hour. And what I thought was crazy, a horse is 44, so they're a mile an hour faster.
That's right. They're fast dogs, and unfortunately, just as you mentioned, Mr. Smith thought of a way to make money off of that, and that was the beginning of the end for these greyhounds treated as noble beings. Instead, they are degraded and used and exploited in the United States and now worldwide. We're very happy, though. Our work, starting in 2011, expanded across the globe. I learned of a track in China called the Canodrome, and I learned that 400 dogs were being raced and died there every year. And these dogs were being bred in Australia. If they failed in Australia, they would be then sent to Macau to race and die. And it was just like clockwork. They'd kill 30 a month to make room for 30 new ones. And I was appalled. I'd never heard of a track where there was absolutely no adoption program whatsoever. Starting in the 1990s, when it was revealed, there were a number of exposés on 2020, National Geographic Explorer. People began learning about the cruelty of dog racing, and greyhound adoption exploded across the United States with 300 adoption groups. This wasn't happening in Macau, where the Canodrome was, and every dog was simply killed. And I said to my partner, Carrie, well, we've got to close down that track. And he looked across the room and he said, okay, how are we going to do that from a one-room basement office in Somerville, Massachusetts? And I said, I don't know, but we are. So our board member went over, she took photos, and one of those photos was of a stunning white greyhound with brown spots, and his name was Brooklyn. And he became the face of the campaign, and it took 8 years, but we were able to close the canidrome with the help of the government. So to my point, look, there are allies wherever you go. Don't discount anybody. When we went and talked to the mayor of Macau, he said to me, I will help you. Can you imagine that? If I hadn't gone over there and talked with him about the problem, there wouldn't have been any communication. Most people wouldn't have bothered. But that's what we did, and change started there. And you've got to talk to people. You've got to explain the problem that you feel needs to be solved, and you'll find solutions. And we were able to close the canidrome, and that's what really inspired the worldwide movement to end dog racing. We were able to airlift the 532 surviving greyhounds from that track to rescue groups all around the world, and Brooklyn himself came home to my family.
I was going to ask if that Brooklyn was your Brooklyn.
He was my Brooklyn. Oh boy, was he my Brooklyn. And unfortunately, within just a few weeks of coming home to me and my family, he was diagnosed with cancer, and we had to have his leg amputated. But he was so resilient. He had spent 8 years in a barren concrete cell, and he was very thin. As I said, he didn't have many teeth left because they had to be extracted. But what do you know? He did so well as a tripod, and everybody who met him just loved him. And when we told about his story of survival, it was so inspiring. So we knew if we could close the canidrome, we could help close dog racing wherever it existed. And right now there are over 100 dog tracks around the world, 64 of them in Australia alone. So we have our work cut out for us, but we have formed alliances and worked with groups around the world, and the campaign to end dog racing is vibrant and moving all across the globe.
Well, let's go a little bit of your history, because I know at one point, and correct me on the numbers, there were somewhere around 50 tracks in the U.S. We're down to 2. There are 6 countries currently that have dog racing, though I think you told me when we didn't say, I think you sent me a thing, Mexico's now closing, and so that's going to be down to 5 countries?
So if you'd asked me this question a week ago, I would have said there are 7 countries with dog racing, and there still are, because the Mexican dog track has announced its closure. It will soon hold its last race, and that will bring the number down to 6.
Okay.
And we're currently engaged now in helping with the release of the dogs there. This is the great part of my work. We go in, we pass legislation, we make those changes in the law needed. It opens those cages up, the dogs come out, and then we can help get them into the hands of wonderful adoption groups who are so happy to take them, especially now. People really want to adopt greyhounds. They're extremely popular, and we're just so thrilled for what's happening at Caliente, which is the Mexican dog track in Tijuana. Now, the strategy there was we knew that the revenues for Caliente were not coming from people at the track betting on dogs. It was a ghost town. What was happening was that remote wagering was happening. People were able to bet on the races from other places, just with their cell phone. You can bet on a dog race. So
Yeah.
It's sometimes referred to as simulcasting. If you're at one track, you can bet on races at another track. That was happening as well. That was what was propping up Caliente, American dollars. So we've been working state by state, and just in the past few weeks, we've ended simulcast wagering in 2 states, New Hampshire and Arizona, and before that, Colorado and Massachusetts. So we've been basically starving them out, and Caliente's revenues were taking a hit. So it was just not a worthwhile enterprise, and we're so glad that the right decision has been made. And it's been a wind down. The first step was in December when it announced that it was going to release 200 dogs, which was wonderful. And I knew the end was coming, and in fact, it has. And soon, all of those dogs will be out.
So Caliente's a horse track race too, right? Or horse track as well, right?
Well, Caliente has a lot of things going on there. There's a zoo. There's known to be a bull ring. I mean, the owner of the track is engaged in a lot of different enterprises. So there's more work to be done by animal advocates in Tijuana for sure.
Absolutely. So getting back to you guys get started, the world's got dog racing everywhere, and now it's still around. There's a lot of the big one's Australia's right now, right?
Australia has 64 dog tracks, and we're seeing dog tracks close in other places. For instance, there are no dog tracks in the London area. They've all closed. There are actually new tracks being put down in Australia. So they are the campaign work is many years behind us, and the work that we've been able to do here, and it's unfortunate. There's a lot of work to do. For instance, just 2020 to 2023, there have been 43,000 reported injuries in Australia.
Well, with that many tracks, it's crazy. What's funny is when I was looking at the countries, and I think it was from your website, they're all the British driven, right? So you've got New Zealand, you've got Australia, you got the UK, Ireland. Is that the four kind of Commonwealth countries, and then the Vietnam's one of them as well, right?
Yeah, I definitely see your point there. Vietnam is in limbo. Fortunately, in March 2023, the government decided it would not renew the license of the dog track, which was great. But they are still noted as a dog racing country because the owner of that track is trying to reopen as I speak. So Vietnam is in limbo. It's really it's really a tough campaign because the track owner is very prestigious, very wealthy. He is actually a dual citizen with Australia, so he has access to dogs quite easily. He has his own breeding. There's a breeding facility that served his track. So I'm hoping that the government will not allow him to open up a new track, but it may happen unless we can stop it.
So, how can people help you in the organization? And again, I'm going to say it for you too. It's the website for you guys is Grey, like Grey, 2KUSA.org. But do you have a worldwide one as well, or is it just that one?
That is our worldwide website. Yes.
Okay, so Grey2KUSA.org. But I mean, you can go to the website. But what else can people do? I guess here in the U.S., Virginia, I guess you'd have to talk to your legislatures there or whatever. Or how would they support you there in West Virginia?
Well, the best thing that everyone can do is help pass the federal bill,
Okay.
because the federal bill is so extensive. The federal bill will not only outlaw dog racing in the United States, it will prohibit the export of greyhounds, American greyhounds, for racing elsewhere. All those dogs racing in Mexico, they're American dogs. It will also block U.S. gamblers from betting on foreign races.
Yeah.
So it's really comprehensive, and that's the most important thing to be done.
What's the bill called?
It's called the U.S. Greyhound Protection Act, and it's right on our website. And we're really wanting to get that done, because once we make dog racing illegal in the United States, there will be a domino effect, and we can go around the world as we have been. We've been telling lawmakers in other countries. We're just back from New Zealand and Australia about the progress here. But if we can communicate that dog racing has been outlawed in the country of its origin, that will make waves, and we predict a domino effect. People will understand that this is the right thing to do.
Okay, so if you can go to your website to find it, but locally, how do you support a bill? Do you just talk to your representatives, or what should they do to help get support to make it happen?
Exactly. So if a person goes on our website and clicks on a link, you could have a letter sent to your lawmaker. That lawmaker, that member of Congress will be identified, and you'll have the contact information. So if you'd also like to call that office and set up an appointment, even, you can go to the district office and talk to the lawmaker and or a member of the staff and say, this is an important bill to me. I want to see dogs protected. And the other thing that everybody can do is adopt a dog, adopt a shelter animal, whether it's a greyhound or not, because when you adopt a shelter animal, that makes room for another animal, and that animal could be a greyhound or another dog in need. So
Right.
I don't discriminate. I want to see all dogs and all animals protected.
Last question for you, and I'm right there with you on that. So I'm guessing there's specific greyhound breeders now. I know most of them were raised for racing, but people get them as well. So if you wanted to, aside from going to a shelter and you wanted a greyhound, there are rescue groups for greyhounds, for one.
That's right.
And then the other thing would be there are breeders that have specifically that. Are there many greyhound breeders?
Well, fortunately, what we've seen is, especially once we passed the ballot question in Florida, closing all the tracks there, that was the beating heart of greyhound racing. By the time we got to the ballot, there were 12 dog tracks. And the voters of Florida went to the ballot and voted by 69% for them to close down. Some of the folks who were breeding for racing are now breeding these greyhounds as companion animals. And greyhounds are available. Certainly, they're members of the AKC. They compete in the Westminster Dog Show. I mean, these are dogs just like any other dog. So you could certainly adopt a greyhound, and it's not hard to do. Wherever you are, just Google a greyhound rescue in your state, or go to our website, and we have a list of adoption groups around the United States and around the world that are working hard to help greyhounds. And you can also make a donation to any of those groups. They sure could use it.
And then on social media, how do people find you as well?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're at Grey2kUSA wherever you go. Instagram, Facebook, X, the whole 9 yards. And we're also on LinkedIn, and we try to make sure that all of the key news crosses all those platforms. And yesterday's big announcement about the closure of Caliente has had a great ripple effect across social media. We're all celebrating this wonderful, wonderful happy ending for greyhounds there.
That's great. And so you just did a TED Talk. We didn't even talk about that. When is that going to be available?
And I think it'll be about 4 or 5 weeks. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, that was quite an honor. We were asked to do a TED Talk, and we only had weeks to prepare, which was very shocking. Usually it's, I heard that it's usually 6 months, but anyway, we knew it was a great honor. So yeah, we were just in Georgia taping that a couple weeks ago. So that will be available on our website and our social media and all that once it's done.
Cool. Okay, so here's the last thing. I know you didn't want to do the joke thing. Trust me, if I hadn't started this thing, I probably wouldn't do it. And for everybody listening, I know you're cringing now. So I have a joke for you to see if you can get this one. When do you stop calling a black dog black?
I don't know.
When it becomes a gray hound.
Okay. Well, Mark, could I do one more pitch?
Sure, absolutely.
Anybody who would like to learn more about this fight and hopefully gain some inspiration for taking on hard problems in their own lives, I hope they'll consider reading our book. It's called Brooklyn Goes Home, and it discusses our 25-year campaign to end dog racing in the United States, and we tell it through the life of our rescued Greyhound, Brooklyn. And there's a cast of colorful characters that we met along the way, and we've lost so many times and gotten up again. And that's the lesson we hope people walk away after reading our book with. They know that change is hard, but it's also possible. In fact, it's inevitable.
That's a great message. And it's like when the going gets tough, tough get going.
Exactly.
Well, I didn't know about the book. I wish we talked about that earlier so everybody could hear about that too. But that's great.
It's available on our website and also on Amazon, at your local bookstore and library, and it's out there. It's called Brooklyn Goes Home, and it's something we worked on for several years, and we're very proud of. But it's not the end of the story.
It's the beginning.
The first 25 years.
It's the beginning of the story. Anyways, Christine, thanks so much for being on. I really, really appreciate it. I know you're really busy, TED Talks and podcasts and trying to save the Greyhounds, but taking the time really means a lot to me.
Well, thank you, Mark. But listen, I'm just a Jersey girl who saw a problem and wanted to see if I could help solve it. And I'm nothing special. I hope anybody listening who knows about a problem, whether it's dog fighting or pollution or whatever it is that is in their own mind that needs to change, they jump in, take a chance, and try to help solve the problem.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a lesson for everybody. And then for everybody out there listening, if you want to get a hold of me, we'll send a new joke or whatever, you can always send me an email at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. But most importantly, keep following us, spread the word. These stories like this out there really need to be told. And if you can find more people that will listen to this, I'd appreciate it. I'm sure, I know Christine would as well. So, and more importantly, the Greyhounds will probably be a lot more appreciative than us. But everybody else, thanks so much for listening. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for real.
Thanks, Mark.
For real, 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 for real.
We're supported by Let's Walk, that's here to love your animals like our own.
Austin, Houston, and Denver. Let's Walk is here to love your animals like our own. From daily walks, play, in-house sleepovers, and more. Go to work, out on the town, or take a vacation knowing your pets are in the best hands. This woman-owned small business does it all. Check us out on Instagram at Let's Walk Austin, Houston, and Denver.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.